The magic behind the cape. Here to give you an in-depth look at how the Academy Award-winning special effects were created for Superman, Oscar winner Roy Field.
Hello, my name is Roy Field. I'm a supervisor of optical effects for Superman. I'd like to give you an overview of some of the special techniques and special effects that we developed for this movie. I'd also like to show you some very interesting early test footage. In order to fully appreciate the special effects work on Superman, you must remember that this film was made before the advent of digital technology in filmmaking. Almost every imaginable technique of the time was used, and many were invented just for this film.
What would today simply be created in a computer, in the late 1970s, took a multitude of different techniques and many skilled artists to complete. Most of Superman's effect shots have combinations of different techniques in them. Les Bowie, Colin Chilvers, and Roy Field, along with director Richard Donner, carefully devised the processes used to realize the effects on the screen. Let's start with a look at the use of miniatures and models. Miniatures require special photography such as slow motion and atmosphere to give the object its mass and proportion.
These are the Krypton miniatures built by Derek Meddings. With miniatures, it's important to establish the scale, and the one way to do that is by showing a human. Here you can see the people trapped in that little beam of light, and that tells you the scale. You can see what a massive building this is, and the speed of the camera slows it up to make it even more dynamic.
This model of the Golden Gate Bridge was built on the lot at Pinewood Studios. Finished, it stood 70 feet long and 20 feet wide. The closer shot of the bus had a larger, more detailed model. Intercut with the children inside the bus and the shot of Superman flying past, the illusion becomes complete.
Okay, kids, it's all right now.
This miniature of the Hoover Dam was built at 1/50th scale. Photographing it was complicated because it was accompanied by a full-scale prop: water.
To feel the impression of enormous amounts of water, we had to run the camera at a very high speed. This will slow the action down and get a lot of volume and power into it.
A test shot of the Baby Kal-El starship was photographed with wires, which would be removed later. The spacecraft measured 2 feet wide and was covered in a reflective material made by the 3M company.
For the formation of the Fortress of Solitude, Dick Donner wanted a magical look with a feeling that it was created from nothing. Lighting and atmospheric effects, along with impeccable editing, perfect the scene.
The Air Force One miniature was designed from actual plans of the real plane. It measured 4 feet across. Different scale sections of the airplane were built to accommodate the scripted action. Here, the burned-out engine and wing were built at full scale to photograph correctly with Christopher Reeve. Superman used physical effects in practically every scene. These effects are performed on the set and have to interact with other types of effects.
Colin Chilvers used hydraulics to thrust out large columns seen breaking through the floor during the destruction of Krypton. The sets were shook and spun on huge gimbals, hydraulically controlled. This football, coincidentally made out of wood, was fired out of an air cannon buried in the ground. One of Colin's most difficult jobs was crushing Lois Lane's car. The auto was dropped into the ground in New Mexico via a buried mechanism. It was extremely dangerous because Margot was in a very confined space. The car sections with Margot Kidder in them were crushed on the set back in England with a real automobile crusher. She was a very plucky girl to put up with all the effects.
One effect that proved extremely difficult was young Clark Kent running beside a train with uncanny speed. Many different techniques were tested, including a man just simply running and then frame cutting to change his speed. Animated speed trails, motion blurring, and other types of effects were tried, but proved ineffective.
We eventually came to a system where we actually put him on 2 small wires and tracked with him along with an overhead crane. This allowed his feet not to actually touch the ground. We had his shadow, which I was so keen to have, and we don't get on process work. And also, we could control his speed.
My area of expertise is optical and matte effects. Optical effects are the art of combining 1, 2, or many images onto one piece of film.
Here's an example of different parts of the frame being exposed at different times. Les Bowie did a painting for the top half of the building. The bottom half was shot in New York. The helicopter's a miniature which we moved up and down against the painting. All this was then combined on the optical printer.
This is the optical printer. This is used for speeding up, slowing down, multiple images, all sorts of techniques. A wonderful machine. Here is the projector, where we place one piece of film. Another piece of film can be placed in this plane. And this is the camera that rephotographs it. And the picture goes along this line.
The virtuous spirit has no need for thanks or approval, only the certain conviction that what has been done is right.
Production designer John Barry envisioned the idea of a disembodied head of Jor-El. Marlon Brando was shot against black velvet to allow for his superimposition in the Fortress of Solitude.
One of the big problems of this sequence was getting the effects right on Jor-El's face. We did many tests, some colourful as this one. In the end, we decided to keep it very plain and very simple.
My son, you do not remember me.
Different concepts were explored for the sequence where Jor-El teaches his son. But in the end, it was decided that it would be more dramatic to just use Brando's narration over space footage combined with fantastic images.
Peter Parkes and Oxford Scientific Films produced some very interesting images for the journey, which used macro photography. He had a system of collecting algae from under the surface of the sea in Bermuda. These objects are about the size of a pinhead. They were lit in a very specific way from behind to bring out all the beautiful features within them.
Hundreds of elements, including stuntmen, debris, and other objects, were photographed as separate components. They were then combined together on the optical printer, where camera rotations were added.
This is one of the most difficult shots we did, where we travelled through the mask of Jor-El and saw Superman for the very first time. It was a very important moment in the film and had to be a very impressive shot.
Matte paintings have been used since the advent of filmmaking. They're painted on glass by very skilled artists to enhance a shot, sometimes extending a set that is not there or even adding a sky. Here, the painting covers the stage lights and ceiling. It needs to blend in perfectly to the live-action image.
Here's the matte paintings that Les Bowie created for the Fortress of Solitude. All had to be very soft and delicately painted, which is a very difficult thing to do, to match the softness of the real set with the softness of the painting. He went on to paint the St Andreas Fault, which is seen behind Lois when she's in her car, and also the high-angle shots looking down onto the earth. In the railway sequence, the tracks had to be painted going off into the distance. It's a very exacting shot because these lines can't diverge in any way, and the perspective has to be 100% correct. Behind Christopher is painted tracks and landscape. Everything below the line was shot on the stage at Pinewood, and Les Bowie painted all the rest.
Of course, this was a film about a man that could fly. These effects were the most difficult to perfect. No idea was too extraordinary to experiment with.
Here are some of the early flying test footage, including a very first test, slate number 1, take number 1. We actually catapulted a model Superman out of an air mortar. We didn't like the effect. There wasn't enough movement. This particular test is a radio-controlled Superman. The radio-controlled model was about 3 feet wide and of course just lacks life. You have to learn to introduce life into models to make them work. Here's another model flown on wires. It suffered from the same problem, no life. In fact, all these shots were very useful because they actually gave us the directions, if not the actual techniques and angles, that we eventually needed to use. This was an early animation test. We had a feeling that we might be able to animate Superman with a speed trail behind him, but alas, it wasn't photoreal enough. This test was quite humorous because we just projected the image behind the stuntman who had no idea how to act or fly. It's a nice example of how good Christopher Reeve actually is.
This chap was one of our least expensive actors, but his performance was a little wooden.
This is a typical wire shot we did against Black Velvet for the flying sequence with a pair of stunt people. Here's a test for a shot in Superman 2. We had to have a number of actors up on the wires. It's a complicated matter to coordinate all the characters together. The cameraman was actually flying with them to give the shot the same sense of movement in the air. This is what we called a power flight, out of the pool and through the roof, which again was using wires.
There were many different techniques used to make Superman fly, but the best special effect of all was Christopher Reeve himself. We discovered very early on that he, being a glider pilot, could hold his body aerodynamically. So when he got into the harness, the whole shot began to come alive.
Suspending Superman from wires was used when he had to take off or land, usually when other actors were involved in the shot. Christopher Reeve was typically suspended from a tower crane 200 feet tall by 2 wires that were attached to a harness at his waist.
The landing here was interesting because we had to paint out the wires, which you can see. And the most difficult part was when the wires went slack, as when they landed. Wires that were not straight were very difficult to trace.
The blue screen technique was used when Superman needed to turn and twist in flight or become very small in the frame. The blue of the process screen is so pure, it allows itself to be photochemically removed and for the background to replace it in the optical printer.
But the fact that Superman's costume was blue did present us with a particular problem. It was too close to the colour of the blue screen. The wardrobe department had to create the costume closer to turquoise, which was different enough from the screen in colour. Christopher then had to be lit so that we could return the costume to its proper colour optically. In order to understand how the lion's share of the flying shots are photographed, it's necessary to understand the principles of front projection. This technique was supervised by Dennis Coop. The key to the whole system lies in the 3M's beaded screen material, which we made our screens of. The screen can reflect light back in the same direction at almost 1,000 times the original intensity, but only in exactly the same direction it came. A piece of glass, mirrored on one side and transparent on the other, is placed directly at 45 degrees in front of a camera lens. A projector that's projecting a background scene, let's say typically the desert or metropolis to go behind Superman, is then bounced off the mirror surface onto a 3Ms beaded screen where it is greatly intensified. The light is then returned directly through the transparent side of the mirror into the camera lens.
Now we have the actors mounted on an arm in front of the screen, and we need only light them moderately to overpower the front projected image that will be falling on them, and they are seamlessly inserted into the shot. This is a lightweight front projection rig we constructed. The projector in this configuration is attached below the 45-degree mirror. This apparatus is built to be extremely mobile to give as much movement as possible to the whole flying sequence, and Christopher himself can remain horizontal in front of the screen.
Zoran Perisic added an interesting twist to the process by synchronizing zoom lenses in the projector and the camera to allow Superman to appear to fly directly towards or away without ever moving. Zoran called this process Zoptics.
Be safe here, son.
In order to effectively sell the concept of Superman flying with great speed, given the fact that most of the time he was hardly moving, a special cape fluttering device was created which consisted of umbrella-like poles under the cape that moved by remote control. Superman was filled with a multitude of ingenious special effects techniques. Some were tried and true, others were invented especially for the film. Here are a variety of effects used throughout the movie.
I ask you now to pronounce judgment.
Guilty.
This sequence involved the faces of the judges looming over the courtroom. We used 9 Mitchell projectors, all rolling in sync. This is a test we did the day before Brando arrived, just so we could make sure everything worked technically before he actually had him on set.
Guilty.
The Krypton costumes were also made of 3Ms material. We projected a white light into the 45-degree mirror onto the costumes, which would reflect the light and glow magically.
This is a test for the Phantom Zone. We tried to look for different distorted effects, and we eventually settled on cramming them into a little rectangle which came down and collected the villains and took them away. Various other effects that we shot were pushing against membranes, creating distortions, and tracking around the characters. The camera was in a spinning mount that would rotate in 360 degrees, and the actors were also turning. This created a multitude of movements. We also shot Brando and Susanna York on a turntable in a variety of different ways as options to show their deaths on Krypton, but these were never used. Here's an interesting test of Superman flying through lava. This was composited on video. We were trying a different approach. The scene itself was shot with a lot of aluminium foil and lit red, with Christopher flying on an arm or on wires. This is an early test of Superman receiving bullet hits. We actually superimposed many of these, although here the 45-degree mirror reflects them over the stuntman. And here is the scene as it is finished. This was a crazy test we did for Superman 2, showing Superman losing his powers. It turned out to be a little bit too psychedelic.
The sequence that displays the widest diversity of effects techniques is the helicopter scene. It was shot piece by piece over 12 months in 2 countries in at least 5 different locations. It truly became the signature scene that defined the movie. There was physical effects. Matte paintings. Front projection. Opticals.
Excuse me.
Wire work. And of course, fantastic heroics.
Easy, miss. I've got you.
You've got me! Who's got you?
We built this sequence up. It started with a few shots. We added more as we went along. Even to the extent that halfway through, Dick Donner thought that we should actually drop the helicopter, which wasn't originally scripted. Not one Jeopardy, but double Jeopardy. And the sequence became known as the Double Jeopardy sequence. Its success relies upon the intercutting of all the different techniques, and that's why it was so successful. They all blended so well together.
Superman was a labour of love for all of us involved in the special effects, but we're very proud of what we were able to accomplish, and I'm pleased that I've been able to give you this opportunity to see the challenges we faced to make you really believe that a man could fly.